Fancy. All right, how's everybody doing tonight? Doing good. Good. Well, if you guys don't know me, my name is Lucas Williams, and I am part of the SMA program, Student Ministry Architects. And we're a startup that helps churches transition to youth pastors. So we're helping Philly right now, and we've been since August. It's been crazy. We just took a trip to Gatlinburg. Jennifer led that trip. How was that trip, Jennifer? It was awesome. It was pretty crazy. Huh? Cold but awesome. Yeah, Gatlinburg on a holiday weekend is packed. It's insane, and we had to keep track of a bunch of kids. So, but tonight you're at a training for dating and sexuality. Woo! Everybody excited to be here? Yeah, I can feel the energy. I can feel it. Maybe you're here tonight and you didn't know this is happening, so you're trapped and you don't want to get up and leave right now because it'd be really awkward. And glad you're here, regardless. Maybe you're here tonight and you're a parent, you're a grandparent, and you came because, full transparency, you don't want your kid to be a part of an unwanted pregnancy, teenage pregnancy, or you don't want them to get an STD or be a part of a abusive relationship. And I think that's warranted. I think that caution is warranted because right now in our culture, we have a TV show called Teen Mom. You guys know that? It's been going on for a while. That glorifies teenage girls getting pregnant. And it's not supposed to glorify it. It's like, oh, this is really hard. But in the end, there's a TV show been running for years called Teen Mom. There's a recent study shown that 50% of students are having sex before the age of 18. It's 50%. And so if you're here and you're a concerned parent or a grandparent, I think that concern is warranted. Some of us are here because we were never given the talk by our own parents. And we feel like we need to do that, but we just don't know how to go about it. That's pretty scary. Whose parents had that conversation with them? Okay, we got a couple whose parents did that, right? And you're like, well, I don't need to do that with my kids or my grandkids. Look how I turned out. I'm fine. But we need to now more than ever. We need to enter into the messiness of that, the uncomfortability of that, because if we don't, culture will. That's just reality. And I think if you guys are coming to Philadelphia, you guys are Christians or searching through faith, I think we want our students to be formed not by culture, but by the church, by biblical worldview. And so this is important. Actually, I would say that this topic is one of two of the most important cultural issues that we can talk about today. I really believe that. And there's pushback on that a little bit. There's lots of other cultural things that are on the front lines. But I would say digital stewardship, which we did a parent training on in the fall, is what I've seen pretty damaging to students. Social media, pornography addiction, mental health problems all stem from not knowing how to steward this right here. And the second is dating and sexuality. I've been on the front lines in youth ministry for about 10 years. And let me take my keys out here. And can you all hear me in the back, by the way? I'm trying to project. You guys can hear me well? Okay, good. And I've really seen, so the past 10 years, I've seen it flower in devastating ways in my own ministry. Students who are having sex outside of marriage. We caught one time students having sex in a car outside the parking lot after service. And pretty blatant. And I've even seen students now who, more students now more than ever, who are identifying as different genders, sexualities, and just seeing that take root and really devastate a lot of faiths. And if this training isn't enough to convince you, I want to encourage you guys to watch this documentary. It's politics aside, it's a good documentary called What is a Woman? By Matt Walsh. Kind of goes into what's being taught at schools, what's being preached all throughout the country with radical gender theory. And so, and actually I just saw an article today. This hits a little close to home. You guys probably can't see this, but it says North Carolina Teacher Association instructs kindergartners in radical gender theory. January 24th. So that was yesterday. This is in the Daycare Association and the School Association for North Carolina, that 4th and 5th graders are being taught radical gender theory. And whatever your politics is, if you have a biblical worldview, we need to be united. We need to be educated in how to traverse this. It's not easy. It requires a lot of nuance, a lot of hard conversations. So I'm not saying this is a black and white issue, but I'm saying however old you are, however young you are, that we need to be talking about this. So thanks for being here. And the questions, what kind of parents, what kind of questions are parents and students asking? They say, how do I talk to my kids about sex? It's pretty hard. It's pretty uncomfortable. What if my kid is LGBTQ+? What if their friends are? What does God say about sexuality, sexual identity? What are cultural views of masculinity and femininity versus a biblical worldview? These are all questions that pertain to this kind of topic. And so we won't be able to answer all of that. We want to in this training, but we just have such a limited amount of time. And actually, I feel like you're going to leave this training a little unsatisfied, wanting some more, because we're trying to dabble in a lot of different things. Dating and sexuality spans a lot of different nuanced topics. And so you'll probably leave a little bit unsatisfied, but our hope is that this is the beginning of a conversation. This is the beginning of a conversation between you and your wife, or you and your husband, between you and me, between yourself and Pastor Carey, most importantly, between you and your kids or your grandkids, whatever that looks like. And we want to provide a framework for you going forward. So we're not giving you the fish, we're teaching you how to fish when it comes to this kind of topic. So if you feel a little unsatisfied, I did my job. And also there is a note page. I don't know where it is. That's right over there. So take notes. There's a QR code where you can scan and get more resources, books and podcasts to continue from this conversation. And then, I'm open for questions afterward. I'm sure at some point I will make somebody upset, or they'll disagree with me, or they'll just want to dive more into it in this. But just know I come from a position of humility. Once again, this is just really nuanced. It's not black and white. I wish it was when it comes to these things. I mean, you're a principal at a school, right? I'm sure you're traversing this already in a lot of difficult ways. And so grateful to be here, and I'm going to pray, and then we'll get into the meat of it. God, we love you, and we're just so thankful to be here right now. God, would you humble our hearts? Would you put us in a position of humility where we say, God, we don't know what to do, but would you give us clarity? Would you give us your spirit to help us be the leaders that our kids and our grandkids need right now? Because in this increasingly secular society, God, we need to be different. We need a call to action, and we need, God, we need your grace, and we need your strength. So help us to do that as we begin this conversation. In your name we pray. Everybody said, Amen. Amen. All right. So what are the goals of the training? Also, guys, I'm sorry. Some of this text, this is not so much hard to read, but some of it's very small. So I'm sorry for you guys in the back who can't read it. But the goals of the training is develop a robust biblical why behind dating and sexuality for teens. And then receive practical tools to help you and your teen navigate dating and sex in an age-appropriate way. Go to the next slide. So we're going to start where the Bible starts. Admittedly, when it comes to dating, there we go. Okay, I'm still in the picture here. When it comes to dating, does anybody know a passage in the Bible that talks about dating? Not really. But luckily, we have something in the beginning in Genesis that gives us a biblical framework for how to go about it. So we're going to read Genesis 2:20-25. I didn't bring up my Bible. Don't call me a heretic. It was just too clunky up here with this small thing, so I'm just going to read off the screen. This is the creation narrative. It says, the man gave names to all livestock, to the birds of the sky, and to every wild animal. But for the man, no helper was found corresponding to him. So the Lord caused a deep sleep to come over the man, and he slept. God took one of his ribs and closed the flesh at that place. Then the Lord God made the rib he had taken from the man into a woman and brought her to the man. And the man said, this one, at last, is bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh. This one will be called a woman, for she was taken from man. This is why a man leaves his father and mother and bonds with his wife, and they shall become one flesh. Both the man and his wife were naked, yet they felt no shame. In all conversations about gender identity, gay marriage, sex before marriage, if there's any confusion at all about where we as Christians need to stand, this is the pivotal passage right here, Genesis 2, 20 through 25. God's original intent for marriage, for sexual expression, and for sexual identity. This is a creation story. What happens in it? God creates man and he creates woman. For what purpose? To leave mother and father, become one flesh in marriage, and they're naked and feel no shame. They're naked and feel no shame. Isn't that great that if you're married, you can be naked before somebody and feel no shame? That's how God originally designed it. So sexuality is not inherently bad, but outside of the realm of how he created it in this narrative, it is. I'll be transparent. I've been a Christian my whole life, but I went down a path in college where I had sex before marriage. And I'll say this, I did feel a level of shame, not by anybody other than myself. I knew the standard I had was something I failed. And now the beauty of that is that sex in marriage, I feel it feels right. I feel a sense of pride because that's how God created it to be. I watch a show called New Girl sometimes. Sorry, I know I'm a pastor. I've watched a show called Friends, and even in those shows, we see this narrative, very non-Christian worldview. They have numerous sex partners, but you know what? They feel empty. They feel empty because they're looking for something different. They're looking for something different. They're looking for this next passage. The man was intimate with his wife. She was intimate with his wife, and she conceived and gave birth to Cain. She said, I have made a male child with the Lord's help. The key word right there is intimate. Go to the next slide, Carrie. In Genesis 4:1, the Hebrew word for intimacy, yada. Is that how I say it, Carrie? Yada?
Yes, that's good.
I mean, it sounds like, maybe there's more of like, yada, I don't know.
You say Yoda there, I think you're.
What'd you say?
Still say Yoda.
Yoda, okay.
Yoda.
Yada is used to describe Adam having relations with Eve. This word, however, paints a much more beautiful picture of what is taking place and gives us insight into what we're seeking, students and parents alike. Yada, intimacy. To know, to experience, to make oneself known to somebody. To not just physically naked, but emotionally naked with somebody. That's the intimacy that God created between Adam and Eve. And that's the intimacy we're all wired to have. We're sexual beings inherently. We can't deny that part of ourselves. I mean, some of us are called to celibacy, but for the most part, we're sexual beings. We find that intimacy in relationships, whether sexual, romantic, familial, through sexual intercourse or emotional act of connecting with somebody. The problem comes from when we separate these relationships from the rightful place. When we take it out of context of how God designed it, there's hurt, there's brokenness, there's confusion in your sexuality. Scripture is timeless. It may not talk about dating, but it talks about intimacy, what we're driven for. Tim Keller has a quote: "To be loved but not known is comforting but superficial. To be known and not loved is our greatest fear. But to be fully known and truly loved is a lot like being loved by God." To be loved but not known is comforting but superficial. We see that with celebrities a lot, where they're known by everybody. They get all the adoration, but they're not really known by somebody. They can have all the sex they want, but it leaves them feeling empty. They lack that intimacy, that yada that we're talking about. So no matter how your teenager is navigating their sexuality or their dating lifestyle, whether they know it or not, they're simply looking for yada. They're looking for intimacy. And now we know that intimacy is not going to fully come until they're married. But that's the framework through what they're looking for. They're also looking to answer these 3 questions. And these are the questions on your note page. These questions came from a book called 3 Big Questions That Change Every Teenager by Brad Griffin and Kara Powell. And this is the framework that we want to give you guys to teach you how to fish, but not to fish. The 3 questions are identity, purpose, and belonging. Identity, who am I? Purpose, what did God create me to do? And belonging, who are my people? And so we're talking about dating and sexuality. Every one of these questions that are going through the minds of students can be brought back to these 3 core questions. Our first one is identity, and what we're going to do for each one is we're going to find the false narrative, how culture is telling students to find their identity in dating and sexuality, and then the true narrative and what Scripture tells us. Our false narrative is your sexuality is the most important thing about you. Your sexuality is the most important thing about you, i.e., relationship status, pronouns, maybe how much sex you have, who you're dating, whatever that is. I looked up today. Do you know how many different sexualities there are now? You got the LGBTQIA+. Now there are 47 different types of sexualities. 47. When I was in Minnesota, I just moved from Minnesota about 7 months ago. We lived next to a very wealthy, large school district. And before I left, they were putting litter boxes in the bathrooms for people who associate themselves as a cat in schools. And I say this not because I don't have compassion for these students, not because I don't want to have a conversation with them or process that with them, but to tell you the damage that this false narrative has on people, on students whose brains are still forming. Middle schoolers are going from concrete thinking to abstract thinking in a span of 3 or 4 years. And high schoolers are simply just trying to find their place, trying to find their identity, purpose, and belonging. And so when you plug in those ideologies, those sexualities in there, it can only go wrong. I talked to another parent the other day that their kid goes to elementary school where every day they come in, sit at a desk, and they have this grid before them and a tab where they can basically go from one spectrum to the other based on how they're feeling that day. So if they're in the middle, then they'll stay in the middle. But if they come in the next day, they're feeling more like a girl or more at this end, they can adjust that every day. Basically saying what you feel that day is the most important thing about you. How you feel that day is the most important thing about you, which we all know how fickle emotions are. We all know how fickle elementary age students, how fickle middle schoolers are, how fickle high schoolers are. They don't know yet who God created them to be. It's hard to decide that fully. That's a false narrative culture trying to say. The true narrative is that intimacy is the most important thing about you. The greatest commandment in Matthew 22:37-39 is love God with all your heart, soul, and mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. Love God with all your heart, soul, and mind. The most important thing about you is your intimacy with God. And that's cheesy. That's a very pastory thing for me to say. I know it, but it just is. The most important thing about you is who God says you are. It's not to be known as non-binary. It's not to be known as the guy who sleeps around. It's not to be known as the girl who's dating John, right? It's not to be known as any of these labels. But the most important thing about you is your intimacy with God. And the intimacy with others. And we'll get to the intimacy with others and belonging. Purpose. What's the false narrative with purpose? How I express my sexuality gives me purpose. In the 10 years I've been in student ministry, I've seen a lot of stuff happen. And also, I'm sorry if some of the stuff I'm saying is maybe not language that's usually used in a church capacity. I'm using the word sex and other words pretty flippantly, but I think in this conversation it's warranted. Just wanted to put that out there. I apologize if that upsets anybody, but at the same time, can we really talk about this without mentioning all of those other things? We just can't. But in my time frame, I've just seen this false narrative really breed unhealthy relationships and a healthy purpose and mental health problems and suicide, because I've seen students who have transitioned and culture will laud, and they'll applaud that and they'll say, yes, that's great. And they find their purpose in it. They feel good for a while, but you know what happens? It fades. Because it's backwards from how God designed us to be, and it just fades. And I've seen that happen. I've seen students who have had sex who feel like that's, in a relationship that's outside of marriage, and they just feel like that's their purpose. When you have sex with somebody that's outside of marriage, there's a bonding that happens. There's a gluing together that happens that's so intimate and so deep that it feels like it's your whole world. And when that ends, your world ends, it feels like. I've seen students who start a relationship, and that's their whole purpose in life. But that's not our purpose, because anything that is apart from God's original design will fall short. What's God's original design? It's to have sex, to be married, and to have sex in marriage, in the context of marriage. Matthew 7:24-27 talks about how when we abide by Jesus' words, we're building our house on a strong foundation. And when we don't listen to his words, it's like we're building our house on sand. And that's what it feels like these students are doing. That's what it feels like if we're not talking with our grandkids or our kids, we're letting them build their house on sand. And it gives you purpose. Having sex in a relationship gives you purpose. It makes you feel good. It makes you feel close to that person. The whole world disappears because you're close to that person. Dating somebody, we all know the beginning stage of dating, you're just enamored with them. It fills you with purpose and belonging, but it falls away. The gender identity gives you purpose because it's this hat you can wear. It's this new thing that makes you feel good. That culture says, yes, it's good, but it's going to fade away. But we need to build our house on the true narrative. Who God created me to be is how I find my purpose. Romans 12:2, do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you'll be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. I don't know what your students' purpose is, your grandkids' purpose is. I don't know what their calling is, but I can tell you their purpose, the macro purpose, is to worship God, is to follow God closely. And that's what we're created to do, not in your sexuality, not in your relationships. One thing culture will tell you is who God created you to be. What Bible will tell you is who God created you to be is who God created you to be fearlessly and intentionally. And so what I always struggled with was I just was never a really masculine boy. I honestly, and maybe this is like heresy out here, but I never really liked to hunt. I never really wanted to fix cars or drive trucks or anything like that. And I felt like at that age, something was wrong with me. I felt like I didn't belong in my own body. And I'm 29, so that was, years ago before this whole thing sprang up. But who God created me to be and who God created your grandkid or your kid to be is so different. And if they're on the spectrum of masculinity and femininity, like if you're like me as a middle school boy who's really struggled with that doesn't mean I'm gay. That doesn't mean I'm not binary. That doesn't mean I'm this or that. It means that God created me in an intentional way. And I can find my purpose in that. And there's beauty in that. God created all of us differently. But what culture will say is, well, okay, if you're in the middle on that spectrum, then you must be this. That's not true. God created your student, your grandkid, a very intentional, purposeful way. And we're called to find out what that is. And if we don't conform to the pattern of this world, we're going to find out. That's what we're to help our students do. All right, we gotta kind of go through the rest of this real quick. Belonging. What's the false narrative of that? Your sexuality determines where you find belonging and acceptance. Your sexuality determines where you find belonging and acceptance. If your student is engaging in sex and if they're dating or if they identify with a certain gender, they're part of an exclusive club. Whether it's a literal club at a school or a cultural club. And culture will say, well, once you make that decision that you're this gender, or that you've had sex, or that you're dating, you can't take that back. And because sexuality is so inherently identity driven, you naturally find purpose and belonging in it, right? And see how those flow. You find, if your identity is this, then you find your purpose in that, and then that's where you find your community and belonging. But that's just not true. Your true narrative is your intimacy determines where you find your belonging. Your intimacy, to be known and loved by God, determines where you find your belonging and acceptance. To be really known, not just to be a label or to be in a club or a group of people, but in a deep, intimate way, to belong and to be known. And hopefully you're creating in your house and you're creating at this church an environment where that belonging can really happen, where that acceptance can really happen. And that comes through conversations, that comes through clarity. So how do all of this impact us as parents, as grandparents, as we navigate parenting our teens through this fun conversation? We want to provide some practical takeaways for you. When should my student begin dating? We're going to skip that second one, but how do I talk to my student about sex? And how are we to respond to the ever-changing sexual spectrum? Now, once again, we have slides to answer these, but they're not really answers, okay? They're more kind of leading you a certain direction. And so we want to provide further resources. So we're not trying to answer it, but we're trying to kind of lead you the right way. So let's go to the next slide. When should my student begin dating? I don't know. I just don't know. Do we have families in here whose students have started dating? Okay, a couple, okay. That is a conversation that needs to happen as a family between you and your children, between you and that specific student. And here are some questions we're considering. What is the age of your student? Let me just say this. And I don't mean to single out people, but I dated when I was in middle school. And let me tell you, that was the dumbest thing ever. I had no idea. I remember there was one relationship, it was in 7th grade, where her name was Emily, this poor girl, oh my gosh. I didn't say a single word to her for the 2 weeks that we dated. One time, her friends and my friends brought us into the library to sit down at a table across from each other just so we talked, and we just sat in silence. What are we doing? Middle schoolers don't know how to date. I'm sorry. So if you've had middle schoolers who have dated, just don't. I think that, like, when should student begin dating? At least after middle school. Please don't let them do that. What is the age of your student? Hopefully they're past middle school. What is their emotional, spiritual maturity level? I think that needs to be taken into consideration. I think my parents should not have let me date through high school. I was kind of a fool. I made a lot of dumb decisions, but I did it anyway. And have an honest conversation as to why your student wants to begin dating. This is a really good next step. Can they communicate to you a thoughtful reason behind wanting to date? If they can do that, and they're past middle school, and you and your husband or your wife have tried to figure out, a good age where you can have that conversation, and there's a great, maybe there's someone that's a good match for them, then you can begin that process of answering that. But when can your student start to date? I don't know. Have those conversations now. I'm sure you guys have already had that, because dating that's all you want to do when you're in middle school and high school. You as a parent or a grandparent be like, well, they should just not. But when you're in middle school and high school, you got hormones raging. That's all you want to do is think about girls or boys. And so the sooner you can have that conversation, the better. And the sooner you can process these questions with your significant other and with your kids, the better. And once again, there's further resources on how to have those conversations in the resource guide. We'll go to the next one. I don't want to cover that right now. How do I talk to my student about sex? Woo! Fun stuff. And I'm sorry, this is kind of where probably it gets hard to read, but I'll help you guys read. Elementary, 48 years old, and you're like, first off, Lucas, I'm really talking to my kid about sex at 4. This goes back to the thing of either you do it or culture does. With the presence of this now, and not every 4-year-olds don't have this in their hands, but social media, they can have access to computers, all that kind of stuff. Like at schools, like these kind of things are brought up all the time. These words and phrases and conversations about sex and all that kind of stuff, it's being brought up all the time. So I think the more proactive you can be, the better. And I read an Andy Stanley book. It's called The New Rules of Love, Sex, and Dating. Highly recommend it. I don't think it's in the resource page, but highly recommend you read it. He says that this conversation is a lifelong conversation. It's a lifelong conversation. So it's not a conversation where you finally sit down and say, all right, okay, all right, Jimmy, here we go. Here's everything. I'm going to throw it at you. Now, some of you might be like, well, it's too late. Well, I haven't done that yet. But ideally, it's something that you bring up throughout the year. So 48 years old, help them understand bodily autonomy and the importance of consent. And this is the age where parents need to be proactive in helping the child form a non-shameful view around the human body, talking about body parts, all that kind of stuff, bringing those conversations up where you're teaching them what those are for. And even students, your kids hearing, I hear this all the time where a parent will get in a car and their kid will be like, Mom, I heard this word at school today. What does that mean? Now, as a parent, your natural reaction is like, whoo, clamp up and be like, I don't want to talk about that. We'll talk about that when you're ready. But slowly over time, kind of introducing and talking about those concepts with your students in the car ride home from school. Now, there's a fine line. There's certain terms that you probably shouldn't talk about to a parent, but I think this can be a lifelong thing. Slowly introducing this concept of sexuality in your students. And preteen, 9 to 12 years old, this is where you can begin having more detailed and extensive conversations about puberty, sex, and dating. Leave the door open for continued dialogue. It should not be a one and done conversation. Let me just say this. Your job is to be in a position as a parent, and I know you guys know this, is to gain their trust. You're like, well, I deserve it. I own it. No, you don't. Like these students, especially as they get in their teenage years, some of you guys are finding out they are very secretive. They don't want to tell you all the things they're struggling with. They don't want to tell you who they're dating, who they like. But the purpose of having these lifelong conversations is to develop a trust or rapport. You're not trying to shame them. You're trying to create a conversation with them. There's things I wish I had talked to my parents about that I never felt like I could. My mom married, my parents got divorced when I was a young age. She married another guy, and my stepdad always shamed me and made fun of me for dating and for liking her. And it wasn't in a mean way, it was in a joking way, but I just never wanted to bring up any of that stuff to either my mom or stepdad or my dad because I felt like it was too taboo. And so when I actually struggled with physical things in high school and in college, I didn't want to bring that up, process that with my parents at all. And I think that created a wall between them and probably some growth that could have happened. But I lacked it because I didn't have a deep relationship. Not a bad relationship with my parents, but not a deep relationship when it came to sex and that kind of stuff. So keep the door open for continued dialogue. One of the things my mom did do to me once was she heard that something happened and she came to me and she said that she had also made a mistake like that. And so I think in those moments when your kid is struggling with pornography, I know this isn't part of this conversation, but pornography or they make a mistake in a relationship physically or whatever, to not come at them and be like, how could you do this? What's going on with you? But just to remember what it was like to be a teenager, to be at that hormonal age, and you're going to make mistakes. I'm sure we've all made those mistakes before, but to have a relationship with your student where you offer grace and then you challenge them. And then teen 13 through 18, revisiting conversations about sex and dating, hopefully trying to have further conversation with them about, if they're ready to date, if they're interested in that. ask more pointed questions without shaming or judgment, and then have conversations about their desired date and what they may look like with your guidance. Take that or leave it, I don't know. But I'll also say this, I've had parents before in my ministries, we've talked about pornography from stage and other words that these students are genuinely dealing with in school and in culture. I've had parents come to me and say, they don't want us to talk about it. They don't want their student to hear it because their students aren't saying that. Their students aren't watching it. Their students aren't doing that. I'm just telling you right now. They're kind of soaked in it. The culture, whatever school they go to, it's hard to escape those things. And so the more proactive we can get to having a good relationship with our students when it comes to this kind of stuff, I'm sure a lot of you guys do, but to have a good, deep, trusting relationship. And it's not too late. It's not too late to start that. Don't be like, well, I'm a grandparent, or I've never actually had that conversation with my kids, so I don't want to start now. It's not too late. You can start it now. It might be a little weird and awkward, but some of the best things are uncomfortable, and good fruit comes from it. And then go to the next slide. Responding to the ever-changing sexual spectrum. This is another one where there's no cut and dry answer here. I'll say this, and this isn't on the resource page either, but I want you guys to write this down. There's a guy by the name of Preston Sprinkle. Preston Sprinkle. It's a very unusual name, but he is kind of on the front lines when it comes to gender, faith, and sexuality. He's neither right nor left in his politics. He takes what the Bible has to say about all of this gender identity stuff, and he's done a lot of really great trainings, has a lot of great resources on his website. So write down Preston Sprinkle, and his center is called Center for Faith, Gender, and Sexuality. Look it up. He has all these articles. He has paid trainings you can watch and engage in. It's amazing. Very equipping material for myself in the years that I've gone through this, and for you as parents, because I feel like a lot of us don't really know how to navigate this, but he is the guy when it comes to this. So I just want to point you to that. This slide says students are often using their sexual identity to discover who they are and the group that they best belong to. Self-expression is a significant identifying marker for Gen Z, which is the current generation. I think it's 2001 and on. As parents, when we teach a biblical view of their sexual identity, we're helping them find an age and relational appropriate level they've got with their friends and significant others. I said this before, but your sexuality, the false narrative is that your sexuality is where you belong. Whatever that is, whether you're dating or having sex or your gender identity, that's where you belong. But we're called to read and have conversations about what that intimacy looks like. What a healthy sexual, or not sexual, but healthy intimacy first with God and second with others looks like. So this is not the answer, but continue to look into that and visit Preston Sprinkle's website because it is just amazing. I want to close with this one thing, this final story. It's in Luke 19, 1 through 10. It's one of my favorite stories in the Bible. It's where Jesus encounters Zacchaeus. I'm going to read it. He entered Jericho, this being Jesus, and was passing through. There was a man named Zacchaeus who was a chief tax collector. He was rich. Nobody liked Zacchaeus. Zacchaeus, no bueno. He was trying to see who Jesus was. He was a wee little man, but he was not able to because of the crowd since he was short. So running ahead, he climbed up a sycamore tree to see Jesus since he was about to pass that way. When Jesus came to that place and looked up and said to him, Zacchaeus, hurry and come down because today it is necessary for me to stay at your house. So he quickly came down and he welcomed him joyfully. All who saw it began to complain. He's going to stay with a sinful man like that? Zacchaeus. What? But Zacchaeus stood there and said to the Lord, look, I'll give half of my possessions to the poor, Lord. And if I have extorted anything from anyone, I'll pay back 4 times as much. Today salvation has come to this house. Jesus come because he too is the son of Abraham, the son of man, has come to seek and save the lost. I tell that story as we close for one thing, or for 2 things, sorry. Zacchaeus was highly unliked in that culture. I mean, tax collectors, they took more than they needed. They were ruthless, very hated. But the story tells us two things as parents and as grandparents. Number one, grace first, truth second. Grace first, truth second. And whatever you're navigating with your student, whether it's mistakes they've made sexually, whether it's dating, whether it's their sexual identity being questioned, whether it's friends who struggle with sexual identity, or just having hard conversations with them about sex or pornography, or whatever that is, grace first, truth second. You'll notice that Jesus didn't come up to Zacchaeus and say, Zacchaeus, let me tell you my stance on tax collecting. Let me tell you my stance on the LGBT community. He said, Zacchaeus, invite me over for dinner. And it doesn't say, it alludes to it. They had dinner at their house, and through conversations, through the lifestyle that Zacchaeus saw Jesus live, real heart change happened. Jesus didn't come to him and said, let me tell you everything I believe about how you live out your life. He said, let's have a meal. Let's have a conversation. And I'm sure at some point the truth of right living was brought up. But we're called to do that as parents, as grandparents, and whatever your student is facing. And when you're that welcome presence where you can come forward and say, man, I want to hear what you're going through. I'm here as a parent. I love you. It doesn't matter what you're going through. It doesn't matter what mistake you made. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. I love you. And I'm here to help. That doesn't mean forsaking truth. It means coming with grace first. Because once someone feels connected and loved and cared for, then that truth can come in. The second thing that this story shows us is to, as parents, as grandparents, live lives that model what you want your student to live out. Be the model that you want your student to live out. When Jesus met Zacchaeus, he saw a man who is living a sinful, terrible lifestyle. And when Jesus meets him, the lifestyle Jesus lives is so compelling that it brought change to how Zacchaeus lived. And not only to where he gave back the money that he took, he gave back 4 times the amount. 4 times the amount that he took. Our lives, my life, your life, should be models of the kinds of lives that we want our grandparents, our kids to live as well. So do your best to be a humble, honest parent, grandparent. Do your best to have a healthy, not perfect, but a healthy marriage. To represent the right amount of candor you should have with your students, so that your kids, your grandkids, know how to navigate this conversation with their kids. Because let me tell you, it's only going to get more complicated. And I don't want that to be the case. I have a daughter, a 1.5-year-old daughter. I'm about to have my second daughter in March, and I'm terrified. I just am. I'm terrified to have 2 girls in this world, but it's also a great honor to do that. And I want to have the kind of relationship with my wife that my girls look up to. And so, once again, it's not too late. It doesn't matter if your marriage has gone through hard times, if your kids have seen your marriage go through hard times. It doesn't matter if you've not had a conversation with them about this yet, or that's where you've really struggled. I can promise you a lot of people have struggled with all of this. Be the model that you want your kids to live out, and come to them with grace first and truth second in all things. Whether it's your kid brings a friend home and they relate as a furry, right? Don't be like, whoa, who is this person in my house? Man, give them grace. Say, hey, come to my house. I'd love to have dinner with you. Invite them in, because then that life change can happen from that. So I know that we threw a lot at you in this training, and my hope is that good conversations come out of it. Thank you for listening. I know this is, once again, a very nuanced, complicated topic, but hopefully you are more informed today than when you first came in. And once again, we want these conversations, this conversation to be the start of something, not the end of something. So when you leave here, it's not like, well, we're good now. It's like, no, have these conversations with other people. Use the resources, read the books, listen to podcasts, go to the websites, because that's where true change is going to happen. Let me pray, then you guys can be on your way. God, we love you, and I just pray you would embolden all of the people in here, whatever relationships they have with elementary, age kids or with teenagers, God, that you would embolden them to have these hard conversations, to be good examples, to practice the kind of leadership that your son Jesus showed, being a grace first person in certain circumstances. God, just help us as leaders to navigate this very complicated and ever-changing sexual landscape. We need your spirit. We need your help because we cannot do it on our own. So we give it to you, Lord. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Lucas. And Yvette should be here around now, so there is choir practice. All right. Good night.